Fantastic. I think we can get started. I see that we have a full digital room for today's conversation, building effective ESG governance. So good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to those of you that are on the other side of the Atlantic. Today we are together for a very timely conversation and insightful conversation on ESG governance, and we are joined by Christine Rhodes, Associate Vice President of ESG Reporting and Measurement at TD Bank, and Bill Cooper, Director of Sustainability and Nutrien. Christine, Bill, thank you for joining us today, and welcome. So before jumping in the conversation, a few housekeeping rules. So, oops, just went a slide too fast. There we go. We've been overwhelmed with questions at the beginning, but thank you for that. We'll try to answer as many as we can in our conversation with Christine and Bill. But don't forget that you can also ask questions during the webinar itself. I'll allow some time before wrapping up to ask some questions from the audience to Christine and Bill. If you have any technical difficulties, please chat with us or email us at marketing@dataman.com. If we have technical difficulties, please bear with us, but hopefully that won't happen. And a final reminder that the event is being recorded, and we'll send it to all participants post-events. So what we're going to cover today, we have a very full agenda, and we'll discuss the topic of ESG governance, I would say, in two main segments. The first segment will answer the high-level questions: why having ESG governance in place, like, for example, an executive committee with ESG oversight, and what are the benefits and where to start. And then we'll go a bit deeper and understand the practicalities of it. So we will ask Christine and Bill how they're doing it in their organization. So who is part of these committees, how often they meet, and what's typically on the agenda. And finally, we will wrap up on, of course, translating all this talk into action, because it's useless to have a committee if there is no action after that. And then obviously there will be a bit of time, as I said, to discuss with our audience. So please send your questions through the chat. And before we jump in the conversation with Bill and Christine, just allow me to frame a bit the conversation today. Why we're talking about ESG governance, right? So we all know, and all eyes and ears are pointed to the new requirements that are coming up. We know that the IFRS is working on their first set of standards that should be finalized within the first half of 2023. The US SEC Commission will finalize their proposal on climate disclosure in April, and EFRAG submitted the European Sustainability Reporting Standards to the European Commission last November, and the European Commission is expected to transpose those into law in June 2023. So there's a lot happening from a regulatory perspective, and of course the landscape may seem very fragmented in terms of all these developments. But these three standards have something in common. Those of you that are familiar with the TCFD pillars will recognize this visualization because it comes from the TCFD. All these standards share the same architecture, which is an architecture that is based on 4 pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. So while data metrics and targets are, the part of ESG that is well known, the part that concerns data management, indicators and KPIs, the rest of it actually concerns the process in place to govern ESG impacts, risk, and opportunities. In other terms, the subject of our discussion today. So while the metrics concern really with those disclosure requirements that are really about indicators only, as a friend of mine likes to put it, the other requirements in these standards concerning governance, strategy, and risk management are a bit a Trojan horse. They're not really about reporting as much as building a process, and that process is a governance process. So that's why we're having this conversation today, and we're lucky to be joined by Christine and Bill that will share with us their experience. And in order to kick off, we will also like to provide a bit of context in terms of what's happening from a regulatory and a company perspective globally. So if we look at regulations over the past 10 years, we can see that in the voluntary space, or the soft law space, the regulations addressing the topic of ESG governance structure have been increasing. Obviously, most of these regulations, apply across sectors, but there are also sector-specific regulations, in particular, that are addressing this topic, specifically, for example, for the financial services industry. And what we typically see with these developments is that those voluntary initiatives anticipate and influence mandatory regulation. So the same trend we're seeing in the mandatory regulation space. And also here, this is led by the financial services sector, although there are way less regulations that apply across all sectors. So what does this mean in practice? Well, actually, the regulatory pressure on building adequate governance controls and processes is just piling up. And we can see that companies are also responding. In our database of the 8,000 largest companies worldwide by market capitalization, we can see that over the past 10 years, the number of companies that are addressing and are mentioning ESG councils, committees, working groups, and so on in their documents is increasing significantly. So this tells us that there's a lot happening in this space, and we want to hear, obviously, from Christine and Bill how they're setting up their ESG governance. But before passing the floor to them, we also want to hear from our audience, and we would like to launch our first poll, which is: when is your next ESG committee? Indeed, if you have one. So let's see how many people in our audience already have an ESG committee in place, and how soon that is coming. Let's allow for 20 more seconds. Okay, we're ready to share the results. Fantastic. Well, Christine, Bill, I have to say that the majority of the audience today has an ESG committee in place. So we're not starting from scratch here, but you're talking with other people that are probably in the same level of maturity as you are right now. Although we have a good presence, at 23% of people in our audience that don't have a committee yet. So for those that have yet to start, I think the conversation can also be very interesting and helpful. So let's I'll stop sharing now so we can start with our conversation with Bill and Christine. And well, first of all, I'd like to ask Christine, Bill, any comments about the results of the poll or the data that we've seen so far in terms of trends? Any thoughts top of mind?
Well, I guess not knowing exactly who's on the phone, the breakdown of the participants on the phone in terms of how many have a committee standing already is probably less surprising than maybe your data around your scan of I think you said 8,000 reports in your database. And it was still less than 1,000 with a mention. And so the AI kind of algorithm, who knows exactly what it picks up, but I don't know what those other 7,000 companies are doing without some sort of a committee or working group in place. I mean, even just to have the one, let alone maybe a more complete structure. So it'd be interesting to see how that continues to move.
Of course, that's
sorry, Donato. Yeah, I think it's exciting that from 67, 2/3 of this audience have that already. So I think that's just shows kind of the maturity and where this is going, and I think it'll kind of continue to go and get more complex as Christine mentioned. Some organizations, I'd be interested to know kind of where they are in terms of their structures and how they've set it up, and if it's just a singular committee or if it's got greater alignment within the organization as well.
Yeah, and we'll get back to that in our conversation today. Like, is one committee sufficient, or we even need more? But before going there, I think we want to take a step back and just respond to the question, why all of this? Because to your point, Christine, yes, it's surprising to see that with all these regulations coming up, still there is a big gap in terms of all the organizations that should do this. So let's start with your specific example. So why you set up an ESG committee? What are the benefits that you see in having that in place?
So is that to me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. Well, I think in this day and age, there was a time maybe 5 or 10 years ago when sustainability or ESG functions were really primarily siloed, and so there was a small group of people or one person, maybe even if you were lucky, who was responsible for sort of establishing all of this and doing all of the work. Fast forward to today, over the past few years, ESG has become so complex. The expectations are so intense, especially for publicly traded companies and companies in certain industries, that one siloed team or person, there's absolutely no way that you can do A, the volume of work, but B, do justification to the complexity of the work. So the committee structure at various levels within the hierarchy to bring together the right corporate functions, the right business operations individuals who have necessary information to input into this strategy determination or performance measurement process, whatever the components might be. It's absolutely required because ESG is expected to be so integrated into business, and it will not be successful unless it is integrated into business. So those are some of my first thoughts. In terms of the benefits, a couple of things come to mind. Just making sure all of those relevant people across the organization are getting consistent information and able to have the discussion, so that you're not sort of having too many one-on-one dialogues without the benefit of all parties at the table. And I know for us at least, the forced cadence of the monthly meetings or quarterly, whatever the setup might be, it is rigorous. It keeps us moving along, and so that's helpful to us. It's hard work sometimes and complicated work, but when you've got these meetings coming and you've just got to keep the work moving, it just helps to kind of keep us on track.
That's a very, very interesting angle to look at it, like ensuring there is cadence, right? That I think that's a very good benefit to get the ball rolling and ensure that decisions are taken. So just to summarize, well, from a why perspective, it's a must-have. Like if I understand your perspective correctly, like there's no way you can manage ESG these days if you don't have this governance in place, essentially. And
that would be my feelings. Yes, unless you're a very small sort of privately held company, but.
And Bill, would you agree with that? So why, for example, you set up a committee in Nutrien, and what are the benefits that you see?
Yeah, I do totally agree with that. I think the way we kind of got into it was we were stepping more into ESG as an organization, a few years ago, and I think what we found was we were kind of tripping on each other internally, where we didn't have an efficient way of making decisions around this and bringing in the right views and thoughts from different parts of the business in terms of a strategy from a sustainability perspective that we wanted to be integrated and core to our business. And so you can't, as Christine mentioned, you can't have that sustainability on the side, kind of doing something and then it not working with the rest of the business. So that was probably the biggest onus. There's a couple issues that we were just kind of going in opposite directions with different functions, and we said, okay, well, we need a better structure on this. We need a better way of managing all of this, because that external space is changing very rapidly, and it's just getting your arms around it is very challenging. So I do agree. I think it's a must-have from a benefits perspective. The way I think we kind of look at it, there's kind of and Christine mentioned a couple of these, but as we think about it, just from an alignment perspective, if our goal is to really operationalize ESG and sustainability, we have to be aligned at various levels in the organization. And so the structure we have set up helps us do that. Secondly, around awareness, because this is such a fast-moving space, you think about just a couple issues as an example. The company's kind of just wrapping their heads, and we've got pretty deep strategy around climate and where we want to go as a company. And then another big topic, like biodiversity or something pops up, and it's like, how do you socialize that through the organization, kind of one after the other, without kind of getting that fatigue. Thirdly, I would say around approvals, it's a efficient way of just getting things that we need higher level eyes on approved and passed. And then I think fourthly is a big thing is just accountability. And that's from an internal perspective, we're accountable. We're accountable to a committee that will call us out on performance or actions, what we said last meeting. And then externally as well, we get our, just from a disclosure perspective, what we put out publicly, we'll have to be accountable to, and this gives us a way of just structuring that conversation internally.
Those are a great point, and I want to pick up on something specific that you said, Bill, which is, and this was also in your answers, Christine. Like the landscape is changing always very fast, so it's difficult to keep track of all these changes and then create the internal, accountability, but also knowledge of what is happening. So I would like a bit to reverse the first question that I asked, right? Like we said, why having a sustainability committee in place? And of course we say, well, because the landscape is changing so fast. So I would like to focus 1 second on what if that committee is not in place, and in a landscape that is changing so fast, what are the risks for the business? What do you think are the consequences, the things that may happen if those forums were not in place?
Well, I think you would have a complete lack of alignment internally, and for I think any business of any size, when you've got different, ours is a fairly large, complex organization, but if you think of even a smaller organization, if you have different operational units or functions going in different directions, or not aware of something that could impact their business that's happening over here. You can make big investments or big mistakes into space where you just don't have, you know, a full knowledge base. So I think that, as I think about it, that alignment internally is just such a massive risk, because it, if you don't have that, I think your mistakes get amplified pretty quickly.
Yeah, I totally agree, Bill. A lot of our committee structures at TD were set up or at least kind of formalized about 3 years ago when we set our net zero targets as a bank. And so just in the year kind of leading up to that, you know, we found we just had to bring together people. I wasn't at TD at the time, but in speaking to colleagues, you know, we just had to bring people together in such a way to get the same information out to people, because to set a big target like that requires, you know, our CEO, our board involvement, and to ensure that everyone was kind of educated on what this meant, to make sure we were educated on, as Bill was describing, you know, what are the pitfalls, you know, what are the risks from all areas of the business, to bring that all to the same table and move it forward. And so that's why we originally brought it together. And without having that committee, I can't imagine we would have been able to make that commitment, or it would have, you know, blown up in our faces in one way or another, from folks who weren't kind of bought into it at the senior level. And now, of course, we've carried it forward and are setting, you know, interim targets on financed emissions and other targets, and we've just found it invaluable.
I think we have, you know, a very good list of valid points of why doing this. You know, often we've seen the regulatory trend before, right? Well, often one of the critiques in terms of these regulatory trends is that it's just adding bureaucracy for companies. Like, oh, you should create a committee and you should make sure that you know, the board and the different levels of management have oversight on impacts, risks, and opportunities, and that, like, in some cases, it's seen as in opposition to action. But it seems to me that based on your conversation, well, actually, you can't have significant and meaningful action unless you have that in place. Would you agree with that?
There's a cultural aspect to this. Like, every company is going to make you know, decisions in different way and have a different sort of risk appetite and level of need of the C-suite to, you know, feel fully informed on different things. Before my time at TD, I was a consultant and I worked with lots of very small companies and larger companies, and you know, it really, you have to set up a structure that makes sense in terms of how your business runs and makes decisions. But like, you know, I do work at a bank, like the bureaucracy is real, and we haven't really kind of gotten to the keys to success yet. But the administrative requirements potentially of managing the committee, especially if you don't just have one committee, if you have them sort of leveled into several layers of management, you know, it is real, and to really get the most out of that structure, there need to be some resources and time set to, you know, making sure the right people are at the right meetings, you know, the minutes, the materials, taking the action items and flowing them up to the you know, and tracking them back. It's if the committee doesn't feel like their voices are kind of being heard and being and their input is acted upon, then you know, you may start to lose some of the buy-in there.
That makes. Sorry, Donato, I think that's a really fair criticism. I think of it's just, and I think we got a little bit of that at the beginning, and we've kind of pivoted a little bit in terms of the level at which different audiences get different types of material, and I think that's so what an executive committee needs to see on their agendas versus maybe a lower level working group is different, and so that's something we've learned and flexed on, and I think Christine hit it well with just around culture, like that different organizations will have different culture around committees and whether they're, you know, viewed as slowing things down or whether they're viewed as an important process, and that's that is something that will probably a lot of companies have to work through. We've kind of worked our way through it because I think people have seen the benefit internally of having those conversations and coming out with action items, with follow-up, and we see kind of the full life cycle of kind of agenda topics, which has been, I think, really valuable for our committee members.
Great, fantastic. So I think we covered that first level of conversation, why this, and also the pros and cons of having this structure in place. What are the risks? So I would like to go one level deeper now, and I think something very interesting that you shared so far is that a lot of the reasons that you have a committee in place concern with keeping up with the developments and sharing those externally. So interestingly, it's not much, or not only about the data and the insights that you already have inside the organization, as much as what is happening outside as well. So on that note, what should be covered in these committees, I would like to hear from our audience again, and we can launch our second poll. So our second poll asks, what do you feel is not discussed enough in your ESG committees? We have KPIs and ratings as first option, progress on publicly announced goals and commitments, then emerging ESG issues, ESG trends, or other. And please suggest what other means in the chat. Okay, answers are coming in. Okay, so this is interesting. We'll allow 20 more seconds. And I think we can end the poll now and share the results. So the majority feels that their committees are not talking enough about emerging ESG issues, which is curious, right? Because we said that one of the biggest motivations to have these committees in place is to keep track of the fast evolving landscape, which I think it means also identifying those emerging ESG issues. So that could be a bit reflection of the fact that perhaps it's difficult to capture what's happening out there, because there is so much that is happening all the time. 20% indicates that KPIs and ratings are not discussed enough, as well as progress on publicly announced goals and commitments. And then finally, ESG trends. And then we have 11% on other, and we can check in the chat if we have any indication of what other mean. But so yes, Christine, Bill, how do these results resonate with what you see in your experience as well? Bill, do you want to start?
Yeah, for sure. I thought that 38% on emerging trends was interesting, because when I think about it, there really is a sweet spot with that, in that if you're constantly bringing, because there's so much going on, so you really have to think about pacing and pacing and cadence of when you're introducing a lot of these new concepts to these organizations, because I think there is a risk of them feeling overwhelmed and saying, well, there's almost throwing up your hands and saying, well, there's too much, can't do everything. And so I think that ties into your strategy as well, as, okay, what are we focused on, what's important, and then what do we share with that group? So that's kind of my takeaway from that poll, I think.
Christine, would you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And Bill talked about how the agendas have kind of evolved at Nutrien over the years, as everyone kind of gets used to the structure. And I would say that's been the same at TD. we spent a lot of time in the first few years on like education. So I would say trends and other sort of emerging issues in ESG. We spent a lot of time kind of bringing up a common baseline of knowledge in some of those areas. And we probably spend less time on that now. People are a little bit more in tune with, what emissions are and what some of the different frameworks are, and what our objectives in D&I might be. But it's hard. It's the rest of the poll sort of showed a pretty even split across the other topics, and that resonates with me insofar as there's so much going on. It's hard to get on these agendas. We've got we just had one of our executive committee meetings this morning, and I had 5 minutes to kind of run through a number of things because there were so many important things to talk about. So there may be a sense of that given the volume of activity in the area.
Mm-hmm. No, of course, and I mean also based on the experience that we have at Datamaran, we see that technology can help in that sense also to point those elements that really are significant or meaningful. But because to your point, there is so much happening right now that just doing a top of mind analysis or a manual analysis, what really matters is difficult, and there is a risk that it will be perceived as subjective anyway. So you both are Datamaran clients. How do you exactly use technology for this, which is not immediately intuitive, right? Committee are like a very human sort of activity. How does technology fit in?
Yeah, I guess I can go first. I think it's been a huge factor for us, actually. So I think so Datamaran is kind of the backbone of our materiality analysis that we do annually, and that's one thing that goes to our executive committee and our board. And so without that, we'd be back in kind of a situation where earlier phase where it's kind of more subjective. It's kind of depends on who's in a room and kind of where the stickies go on the wall kind of thing. And we can point now to, well, we've got objective data on a number of items we think are important to our business, and this is what an analysis looks like. So just from that perspective, it's moved us from really understanding those topics to debating why those topics would be important for us. And so I think that's a good shift for us. And then just from we use Datamaran Insights, whether it goes into an appendix of our executive meetings, or whether it's an agenda item, it influences every committee meeting. It's in our materials every meeting. And I think that data and that objective approach lends itself to just credibility on the overall approach. And I think that's been a very good door opener for us internally.
That's great, Bill. I'm learning. I don't think we use the system so extensively. Similar to you, we certainly use it for our materiality assessment. So determining what topics are of importance to which stakeholders and why. And we do conduct a variety of kind of issues monitoring throughout the year on emerging controversies or evolutions in peer disclosures, and we certainly use Datamaran and other systems for that. The process that we use to kind of filter things into those agendas for the committees, I would say, it does remain relatively manual. But as Bill alluded, you figure out what your key issues are, you use the technology for that purpose, and then once you've kind of narrowed down your sandbox, then we know kind of if we live within that and are emphasizing activities related to those items, then hopefully we're in a pretty good place. But thanks for the tips, Bill.
But we love peer-to-peer learning indeed in our community. But I think Christine, the remark we just shared on having the artificial intelligence and technology help, but always keeping like the human element to it is an important aspect, because no artificial intelligence is perfect in that sense, and the best process is a process that combines both elements. So I think it's also important to be transparent on that. And several years of experience in artificial intelligence, we don't believe in magic ones, right? Like there's no solution that will replace completely what human can do, but we can enable humans to rely on more evidence, being more data driven in that sense. And that's how we like to work with our clients. Now, I would like to unpack a bit more like the architecture that you have in place. So like, who is part of your committees? How often they meet? What is typically in the agenda? So I think this can be like a blueprint for all those people in the audience that haven't started yet, or maybe they have started but are unsure. So I'm sure they can benefit from your really practical experience. So Bill, perhaps you want to start on this, and then Christine can explain how it works at TD Bank as well.
For sure. Yeah, maybe Donato, if you wouldn't mind sharing that one slide, it might be easier for the participants here to kind of understand how I'm describing it. So as I said, Nutrien is a pretty large, complex organization. So our structure is probably more complex as we get bigger as an organization. So if you're a smaller group, it's probably less necessary to have this. I can't see anything, Donato. You're frozen on my screen right now. I don't know if my slide's up or not.
See the same thing, Bill.
Okay. Maybe it was a bad idea to share my slide, I guess.
It's so complex. It broke Zoom.
Broke the webinar, yeah. But I guess I can talk through it. As long as everyone can hear me, that's good. I think, so we've got, I guess, a 4-level structure, you want to call it that. At the very base level and kind of a foundation perspective is we've got a number of, here we go. We've got a number of issue teams we call that are centered around our material topics as an organization. So these are just a sampling of some of them. And a lot of these groups, this is more of an SME level group. And so they're focused on a number of things, but they do a lot of strategy work. They do a lot of developing company positions on topics, things like that. And this work, or setting ESG targets as well, this work flows up upwards through our system. And so we've got a group called an ESG cross-functional group. That's more of a corporate functional group that's chaired by our sustainability team. But it's who's involved in that is we've got risk, communications, government relations, legal, strategy. I know I'm probably forgetting some, but and then that work, they meet on a monthly basis, and so they've got it's 50 minutes monthly, and they're working on aligning strategy and awareness of topics, and that's a real good feedback group for us as well, because that level is a senior level. They're kind of our organization a senior director or a vice president level, so it's more senior, and so they've got good viewpoints and kind of good view of the landscape of the business. And then that flows up to a quarterly executive meeting where they do a number of different things, but that's really aggregating kind of the company view on where we want to go on certain things. And that's got a big approval function as well in terms of new ESG goals and targets, positions, that type of thing. And that then flows to our committee, our sustainability committee of the board. And so we've kind of got a subject matter expert to board workflow of kind of review and approval in our company.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Bill. And apologies if I probably disappeared for a second. I don't know what happened with my internet. Christine, I'll share your slides as well, so you can walk us through your governance model.
Yeah, please. And it's again just interesting to hear, Bill, how things operate at Nutrien. So this is a graphic from our ESG report. It's a little bit more complicated than it needs to be for this conversation, but the 4-level structure that Bill described, that is consistent with how we run things at TD. We have sort of kind of senior manager, junior executive level working groups that flows into a more senior executive member team, and then to the C-suite, and then to the board. But there's a couple of interesting differences. The strategic issue teams that Bill described at TD, we actually take a different approach. And Donato, if you want to actually go to the next slide, I can show what those working groups are. So we call that working group levels our center of expertise, and it's comprised of 6 different hubs. And so we actually segregate that based on sort of business activity. So we've got reporting and stakeholder engagement, which I am a co-chair of. We have a committee that works on, reviewing any new policies or positions or public commitments we want to make. We have a hub that's dedicated to research and analytics. So we get, bulletins from them across the organization when, lessons learned from COP15 or other kind of events and or outputs of research we do. And then our sustainable finance hub is very important in our industry, because it looks at sort of the products and services impact across the bank. So, how are we interfacing on ESG with our clients, and embedding that into, our revenue structure going forward. The leadership and strategy hub, which you see at the middle, that is sort of our executive, sort of junior executive committee that's co-chaired by our head of sustainability, my boss, as well as our head of enterprise strategy. And that is not just a corporate function. There are the heads of ESG from all of our different businesses are there as well, like our retail bank or our investment bank. But that is where, strategy gets kind of debated, impacts to different business units are considered. And then ultimately work would go from there up to the C-suite level committee, which comprises most of our C-suite. And where, it's a little bit more of a formal, not actually a formal approval process, but a very critical step in our governance to set new targets or make certain strategic decisions. So that's one other difference that I heard from Bill. It sounds like, Bill, your committee at the senior exec level has an approval accountability. That's a little bit different for us. We actually retain the rights of our, the executive that I report through, for example, to make approvals around certain things. But these, no person at that level would make decisions without knowing what the inputs of her colleagues from relevant business areas would be. So these committees are critically important to provide that feedback, to make the relevant executives comfortable to approve various items. So all of that meets on an approximately monthly basis. From time to time, timelines could get stretched if it's a quiet period, but we find there's enough to keep about a monthly cadence.
That's great. Thank you for walking us through that, Christine. And I think, this is what I like about discussing ESG governance, is because while you're talking about like the different committees and what they do, you can also see what is the decision-making flow to take certain commitments or decide on certain goals and targets that ultimately drive action. So if actions are a bit the blood of organizations, then these committees and governance structures are, the blood vessels and the rest of the system, if you allow for the metaphor in that sense. So we're getting very close to the end of our session today, and I would like to get a question from our audience, and then let you conclude on what's the trick to translate these commitments or the talks that happen in the commitments into action. I think one of the most interesting questions that we got among the ones that we see here is about like external involvement in these committees. Like often committees are about like internal, but at the same time, we said that it's also about capturing what's happening outside. So do you, for example, invite experts or advisors to join some of these committees? Does that happen in your organizations?
I can just say quickly, for us at this point, no. I think from time to time that's happened in the past, but it's not a common practice now. It's something that has come up and we've debated from time to time. And I have seen other companies use it successfully, but I think there's a comfort factor for our executives to hear from internal experts. Not to say that we have all the answers, that there's far too much here for any one group of people to know, but they rely on us to be in touch with the external experts and do our jobs to monitor what's going on, filter that through the TD kind of lens, and then present the information at that point. But that's a cultural thing, I think.
Yeah, I think that's very similar for us as well. Is we'll use a lot of external information and data. For instance, Databrand material, but we will kind of be the code to interpret that for us internally right now.
Mm-hmm.
I
would say I was just going to say, if you, depending on the size of your teams and who's involved, that may look different for companies. If you don't have the resources internally to keep tabs on that, an external group you may find very beneficial. But of course, it's important to establish the right trust with that group and be prepared. You don't want people coming into your executive committee and throwing things off course inadvertently. So.
Great. No, those are very valid points. I think when it's all about showing the management that things are under control, right? So I totally get why having internal people leading is very important on these aspects. All right, so we're running out of time. I would like to ask you one final advice that you would like to share with our audience in terms of what's the next step in terms of transposing the talks into action, how that can be achieved. I know that this can be like a conversation entirely on its own, but if you have one thought on that you wish to share, I would like to wrap up on that.
I guess I would think as people are thinking about setting up a structure like this, I think that a good lesson for us is that it's not just to talk about things. And I think that's where there's a lot of where frustration will get, because it'll just be, you'll end up just going in circles around talking about stuff, and then you'll have nothing to show for it, and then you'll have people dropping off, and then it becomes a lot less effective. So I think when you're thinking through a structure or refining your own structure, is how do we ensure that kind of circle back accountability to that group on what's happened afterwards and where it's going and what the impact is. I think that has to be part of that ESG structure. So it's not just, okay, yeah, we heard about this last quarter, nothing's happened, or we're not doing anything with it. Okay, that's fair, but why? What's next? And then similar for other agenda items, I think it's really important to tie back accountability to those meetings of where and who in the organization is taking leads on things that these groups have talked about, or otherwise it's just a bit of a talking session.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Bill. Something we've been working a lot on this year is on mandates. So really being clear and articulate and writing down on paper, what those accountabilities are that you just described. What are the topics that are relevant for this group? What approvals or other actions are expected from the discussions. And getting those down on paper. It's been about 3 years since we established a lot of this, so it was the right time to sort of refresh, because certainly there are going to be learnings, as you've heard, but putting it down on paper and then having a cadence to refresh over time, I think is very important. And then the last point I'll mention, which I mentioned earlier, but it is so important to us at TD, is just acknowledging that the resource requirement to do that work justice, the work Bill described of bringing topics back, reporting back on follow-up items, that takes in some cases a lot of hours, and so advocating for the right resources to support that, I believe is critical.
Fantastic. Well, Bill, Christine, thank you so much for your time and your insights today. I'm sure that our audience is going away richer after this conversation. And well, let me wish you a good rest of your day. And to our audience, we'll see you soon on our next webinar.
Thanks, Donato. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.